The 1960s produced the greatest concentration of war cinema in Hollywood history. The generation that had fought the Second World War was now running the studios, directing the films, and starring in them. Men who knew what combat smelled like and what it cost, making movies for audiences who had lived through the same war from the other side of the cinema screen. The result was a decade of war films that ranged from unashamed entertainment to genuine moral reckoning, from star-studded spectacle to political documentary, from boys' adventure to something that looked directly at what nations ask of their men and refuse to look away. 20 films, one decade. Here's how they rank. Number 20, The Alamo, 1960. John Wayne produced, directed, and starred in The Alamo as a personal statement about American values at the dawn of the Cold War decade, pouring his own money into it alongside United Artists financing and spending years getting it made. The passion is visible in every frame. So is the excess. At 162 minutes in its original cut, The Alamo is a film whose emotional commitment to its subject consistently outpaces its dramatic discipline. The final siege sequence delivers genuine spectacle, Richard Widmark provides professional ballast as Jim Bowie, and Dmitry Tiomkin's score is magnificent. But the film around those qualities is ponderous in ways that Wayne's subsequent career as an actor, though not as a director, would never be. It ranks 20th not because it fails, but because everything above it succeeds more completely. Start here if you want to understand what the decade's war film ambitions looked like before the craft caught up with them. Number 19, Battle of the Bulge, 1965. History has not been kind to Battle of the Bulge, and history has a point. The film's decision to use American M47 Patton tanks to represent both German Tiger tanks and American Shermans, shot on the Spanish Meseta rather than in the snow-covered Ardennes, drew a public condemnation from Dwight D. Eisenhower himself, who called a press conference specifically to denounce its historical inaccuracies. This was, to put it mildly, a significant piece of negative marketing. What survives the historical complaints is a genuinely propulsive entertainment. Henry Fonda doing what Henry Fonda always did, which was Project Quiet Intelligence under pressure. Robert Shaw as the German panzer commander. Heisler, cold and tactical and compelling, and a tank battle sequence whose scale still impresses regardless of what the vehicles actually were. Rank it 19th. Watch it anyway. Number 18, Sink the Bismarck, 1960. The most procedural film on this list is also the most underrated. Sink the Bismarck was made by Lewis Gilbert, the same director who would later make Alfie, the first two Roger Moore Bond films, and Educating Rita, working in a mode that the British film industry had perfected across the 1950s. The institutional war film, in which the drama is not individual heroism, but collective problem-solving under pressure. Kenneth More anchors the film as the Admiralty's operations chief, a man managing the hunt for the Bismarck from a basement command room in London while the action plays out across the North Atlantic. The intercutting between the operations room and the fleet creates a procedural tension that is, in its best sequences, genuinely sophisticated filmmaking. The film is modest in scale and immodest in intelligence. It deserves a wider audience than it currently has. Number 17, The Bridge at Remagen, 1969. The last film on this list chronologically is among its most cynical, which in the context of 1969, the year of Easy Rider, the year of Midnight Cowboy, the year American cinema began its formal divorce from the values it had been married to for 40 years, means it was among its most honest. George Segal plays a lieutenant ordered to take the Remagen Bridge over the Rhine. Ben Gazzara plays his superior, a man whose relationship to the mission is entirely careerist. E.G. Marshall plays the general whose ambition is consuming men he has never met. The film's argument is that the military hierarchy is a system for transferring the cost of ambition downward until the costs reach the people at the bottom who have no choice but to pay them. In 1969, this was not a controversial argument. It was the argument the decade had been making since Fort Apache in 1948, and by 1969 it had simply run out of patience for subtlety. Number 16, Von Ryan's Express, 1965. Frank Sinatra carries Von Ryan's Express on professional charm and physical authority, and it is enough, which is the most accurate summary of the film's pleasures. The premise, Italian POW camp, Allied prisoners commandeer a train, attempt to cross northern Italy into Switzerland ahead of the German military, is the kind of adventure machinery that the 1960s war film perfected. Clear objective, escalating obstacles, ensemble cast, genuine suspense engineered from logistical problems. Sinatra's Ryan is an American colonel whose pragmatic decisions in the early sequences make him initially unpopular with his British prisoners. And the film's smarter instinct is to sustain that tension rather than resolve it too quickly. The ending is one of the decade's boldest, and the train sequences build real momentum. It is not deep. It is extremely good at what it is. Number 15, Where Eagles Dare, 1968. Where Eagles Dare is a film that knows exactly what it is. A 2-hour and 20-minute boys' adventure story set in the Alps, built around Richard Burton and Clint Eastwood infiltrating a Nazi castle, and containing enough double and triple crosses in its final act to require a flowchart, and delivers it with complete conviction and considerable technical accomplishment. Alistair MacLean wrote the screenplay simultaneously with the novel, which means the film has the narrative architecture of a thriller rather than an adaptation's inevitable compromises. The aerial cable car sequences are legitimately spectacular. Burton gives the material more gravity than it needs and is more interesting for doing so. Eastwood gives it exactly as much gravity as it deserves and is perfect for doing so. Rank it 15th, which is to say rank it firmly in the category of essential entertainment that asks nothing of you and delivers everything it promises. Number 14, The Sand Pebbles, 1966. The most politically pointed film in Steve McQueen's filmography is also his finest performance, and the two facts are connected. McQueen plays Jake Holman, the engineer of a U.S. Navy gunboat patrolling the Yangtze River in 1926, a man whose relationship to the mission he is theoretically serving is one of profound mechanical indifference. He loves engines, not flags, and who watches the political situation around him deteriorate without the ideological equipment to understand why. The film was released in 1966, the year American troop deployments in Vietnam crossed 400,000, and its portrait of a gunboat enforcing American interest in a country that wants to be left alone to resolve its own politics was understood by every person who saw it. McQueen received his only Academy Award nomination for this role. The film is 2 hours and 42 minutes long and earns every minute. Number 13, The Guns of Navarone, 1961, The Template. The film that established the grammar for the decade's ensemble mission picture, a small team of specialists, an impossible objective, a Nazi target that must be destroyed before a larger Allied operation can proceed, and that every subsequent film in the same mode is measured against. Gregory Peck, David Niven, Anthony Quinn, and Stanley Baker make an ensemble whose internal tensions are convincing rather than manufactured, and the Navarone cliff climb sequence is one of the decade's great pieces of sustained physical filmmaking. The film's willingness to complicate its moral architecture in the final act, to ask what violence cost the people who commit it in a righteous cause, is what distinguishes it from the dozens of imitations it generated. It remains the most influential war film of the early 1960s. 13 other films on this list are in its debt. Number 12, The Longest Day, 1962. 3 directors, 42 international stars, and a recreation of D-Day so ambitious that the production required the cooperation of 3 national armies and a budget that in today's money would constitute a significant military expenditure. The Longest Day is the apotheosis of the star-studded historical epic, a film whose commitment to scope and documentary accuracy produces sequences of genuine visual grandeur. Particularly, the Omaha Beach landing and the paratrooper drops over Normandy. The film's structural decision to present the day from German, French, and American perspectives simultaneously gives it a moral complexity the genre rarely attempted. Its limitation is that 42 stars means 42 characters with 42 storylines, and no character has the space to achieve the depth that depth requires. It is the greatest war film ever made without a protagonist. That is both its achievement and its constraint. Number 11, Battle of Britain, 1969. The most technically accomplished aviation film of its era and one of the most emotionally honest accounts of institutional exhaustion ever committed to cinema. Battle of Britain assembled the largest collection of airworthy Second World War aircraft ever gathered for a motion picture. Spitfires, Hurricanes, Messerschmitts, Heinkels, and filmed them in genuine formation, flying over genuine English countryside, creating aerial combat sequences whose authenticity has never been surpassed or even meaningfully approached by subsequent productions. The film's deeper achievement is its portrait of Fighter Command's command structure, Laurence Olivier as Dowding, Patrick Wymark as Park, as men managing a crisis with resources that are, by any objective measure, insufficient, sustained only by the arithmetic of attrition and the knowledge that running out of aircraft before the Germans run out of pilots is a form of losing. Ron Goodwin's score is among the finest ever written for a war film. Number 10. The Dirty Dozen, 1967. Robert Aldrich's film is the decade's most purely enjoyable war picture and one of the most influential American films of any genre in the 1960s. 12 convicts, murderers, rapists, men the army has given up on, are trained for a suicide mission behind enemy lines, and the film's genius is in sustaining the moral ambiguity of that premise rather than resolving it into comfortable heroism. Lee Marvin commands the ensemble with an authority so total it reads as effortless. Telly Savalas, Donald Sutherland, Jim Brown, John Cassavetes, and Charles Bronson give him a supporting cast that feels genuinely dangerous rather than decorative. The film's attitude toward military authority, skeptical, sardonic, populated with brass who are demonstrably less impressive than the criminals they are deploying, was perfectly calibrated for 1967, when the American public's trust in institutional military judgment was beginning its long decline. It made more money than any other film that year. It earned it. Number 9, Judgment at Nuremberg, 1961. The war film that contains no combat is the decade's most morally demanding production. Stanley Kramer's Judgment at Nuremberg assembles an extraordinary cast: Spencer Tracy, Burt Lancaster, Marlene Dietrich, Richard Widmark, Maximilian Schell, Montgomery Clift, Judy Garland, for a 3-hour courtroom examination of 4 Nazi judges being tried for their role in institutionalizing state atrocity through the legal system. The film's central question, how did educated, professional men justify to themselves the legal enforcement of genocide, is the most important question the 20th century produced, and Kramer engages it with the seriousness it deserves. Schell won the Academy Award for Best Actor. Tracy received a nomination. Clift's single devastating scene, playing a victim of enforced sterilization, is 5 minutes of screen time that rewrites the audience's relationship to everything they thought they understood about the events being described. This film is not comfortable. Discomfort is the price of honesty. Number 8, The Hill, 1965. Sidney Lumet's film about a British Army detention camp in North Africa during the Second World War is the decade's most ferociously angry piece of work. A film about institutional violence so visceral in its detail and so relentless in its moral prosecution that it has never acquired the mainstream reputation its quality demands. Sean Connery, in the role he always cited as his finest work, plays a prisoner whose resistance to the camp's sadistic regime is systematic and deliberate. Ian Hendry plays a staff sergeant whose cruelty is enabled by an institutional structure that promotes exactly the psychology that civilian society would imprison. The film is shot by Oswald Morris in a black and white that turns the camp's sand into something close to hell. There is no redemption in the Hill's ending. The institution survives. The institution always survives. Lumet was making this argument 8 years before MASH made it fashionable. Number 7. Zulu, 1964, 150 British soldiers, 4,000 Zulu warriors, the Battle of Rorke's Drift in January 1879. Cy Enfield's Zulu is the most straightforward film on this list. No political complexity, no institutional critique, no moral ambiguity about whose side the audience should be on, and it is completely, absolutely, irreversibly magnificent. Stanley Baker and Michael Caine, in his star-making performance as a class-conscious lieutenant whose breathing collapses under fire, command an ensemble that operates with the specific physical precision of men who have been drilled until movement is unconscious. The film's structure, the escalating attacks, the contracting perimeter, the singing that passes between the Welsh regiment and the Zulu warriors before the final assault is the war film's action grammar at its absolute peak. John Barry's score is the finest thing he ever wrote. Zulu has been watched by more people in British living rooms than any other war film ever made. It has earned every single viewing. Number 6, The Train, 1964. John Frankenheimer's film about a French resistance railway inspector trying to prevent a trainload of stolen French art from reaching Germany in the final days of the occupation is one of the most kinetically accomplished films of its decade and one of the most philosophically interesting. Burt Lancaster, performing his own stunts as was his absolute requirement, plays Labiche, a man who begins the mission reluctantly for reasons that have more to do with institutional loyalty than personal conviction, and who watches the cost of the mission escalate past every rational point of justification. The film's central question, is cultural heritage worth human lives, and who has the right to make that calculation, is posed directly and answered only partially, which is the only honest answer available. The train sequences, filmed with real locomotives on actual French track, are among the most spectacular physical filmmaking of the decade. The ending refuses consolation with a directness that takes the audience's breath away. Number 5, Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, 1964. The funniest film on this list is also the most terrifying, and the distance between those two descriptions is the precise width of Stanley Kubrick's genius. Dr. Strangelove began development as a serious adaptation of Peter George's nuclear thriller Red Alert, and became, through Kubrick's growing conviction that the material was inherently absurd, the decade's most devastating political satire. Peter Sellers plays 3 roles: the hapless president, the correct-minded British officer, and the former Nazi scientist whose arm keeps trying to perform a Nazi salute against its owner's wishes, and each performance is a separate comic masterpiece. George C. Scott plays a general whose enthusiasm for nuclear conflict is the most accurate portrait of institutional military thinking the American cinema produced in the Cold War period. The war room set, designed by Ken Adam, is a work of art. The final image, the bomb, the rider, the mushroom clouds expanding in stately sequence over Vera Lynn's voice, is the most perfectly calibrated closing shot in the history of American cinema. The decade produced no braver or more intelligent film. Number 4, Army of Shadows, 1969. Jean-Pierre Melville's film about the French resistance during the German occupation is the most somber film on this list, and the one that most honestly answers the question all resistance narratives raise but most prefer to leave unasked: what does clandestine warfare do to the people who fight it? Melville had been in the resistance himself. His film is not about heroism, it is about the grinding, anonymous, psychologically annihilating experience of existing inside a network where the man you trust most may be the one who destroys you, where killing is not an act of courage but an act of necessity, and where survival is not the same thing as living. What separates Army of Shadows from every other resistance film is its refusal to make the characters sympathetic through suffering. They are sympathetic because they have chosen to do something extraordinarily difficult for reasons they cannot fully articulate. And the film understands that the inability to articulate the reason is part of what the choice costs. Lino Ventura carries the film with a stillness that accumulates weight across every scene until the final sequence, which is one of the most devastating endings in the history of cinema. The film does not tell you how to feel about it. It presents you with the arithmetic of what has been paid and leaves you to do the calculation. Army of Shadows was made in 1969, briefly released in France, and then suppressed for political reasons. Melville had portrayed Gaullist resistance figures sympathetically at a moment when the Gaullist government was deeply unpopular for 36 years. It arrived in American cinemas in 2006. It was worth every year of the wait. Number 3, The Great Escape, 1963. John Sturgis's film about the mass escape from Stalag Luft. 3 in March 1944 is the most beloved war film of its decade and earns that status completely. The ensemble, Steve McQueen, James Garner, Richard Attenborough, James Coburn, Donald Pleasance, Charles Bronson, David McCallum, is one of the finest collections of screen talent assembled for a single production in the decade. And the film's structural genius is in sustaining genuine investment in the fates of individuals across a 2-hour and 50-minute running time without losing the audience in the logistics of a tunnel digging operation. McQueen's motorcycle sequence, not historically accurate, not thematically necessary, and absolutely essential, is the decade's single most purely pleasurable piece of action filmmaking. Elmer Bernstein's score is one of the most recognizable pieces of music in the history of cinema. The film's ending, the enumeration of the real men who escaped, were recaptured, and were executed, converts the preceding 2 hours of entertainment into something that carries the weight of history with it. It is the finest example of popular cinema operating at the full extent of its capabilities. Number 2, The Battle of Algiers, 1966. Gillo Pontecorvo's film about the Algerian independence struggle against French colonial rule is the most politically important film on this list and one of the most formally innovative films in the history of cinema. shot in the streets of Algiers with a cast of non-professional actors and a visual approach so closely modeled on newsreel photography that the film opens with a disclaimer stating it contains no documentary footage, because audiences were certain it did. The Battle of Algiers presents both the French paratroopers and the FLN resistance with a moral neutrality that was, in 1966, unprecedented and remains remarkable. Neither side is presented as the hero. Both are presented as people doing what they believe they must inside a political situation that cannot be resolved without violence. The film's formal achievement is inseparable from its political achievement. Pontecorvo and cinematographer Marcello Gatti shot in a grainy, high-contrast black and white that makes the Algiers Casbah feel like both a documentary record and a pressure cooker. And the film's structure, cutting between the French military command's tactical dismantling of the FLN cell network and the FLN's organization of its resistance, gives both sides equal intelligence and equal moral weight. The torture sequences are presented without condemnation and without endorsement, which is the braver editorial choice and the more politically honest one. The bomber sequences, 3 Algerian women passing through French security to place bombs in civilian locations, are among the most morally complex pieces of filmmaking in the history of cinema. The film was banned in France for 5 years. In 2003, the Pentagon screened it for military and intelligence officials as a case study in counterinsurgency. In 2016, the Criterion Collection released a restoration. Every audience that has encountered it, regardless of political position, regardless of historical distance, has recognized that it tells the truth about what political violence looks like from every side simultaneously. No other war film has managed this. Number 1, Lawrence of Arabia, 1962. There is no argument about this. Lawrence of Arabia is the greatest film on this list and one of the greatest films ever made, a statement that has been made so many times it has acquired the quality of truism. And truisms are dangerous precisely because they stop you looking at the thing they describe. Look at it. Look at what David Lean actually built in the Jordanian desert in 1962 with Peter O'Toole and Omar Sharif and a cinematographer named Freddie Young, who was 59 years old and had never been assigned a canvas this large. The film's subject is not the Arab Revolt. Its subject is the performance of identity, a man who does not know who he is putting on a different costume in each scene and finding that each costume fits, and finding that this is not liberation, but dissolution. Peter O'Toole plays T.E. Lawrence as someone genuinely uncertain at every moment whether the person performing the act is Lawrence or the legend Lawrence is inventing about himself, and the film has the structural intelligence to sustain that uncertainty for 216 minutes without resolving it, because the historical record doesn't resolve it either. The camel charge, the crossing of the Nefud, the massacre at Tafas, the final car ride back to Damascus. Each sequence is filmed at a scale and with a visual intelligence that redefines what cinema can do with a landscape. Maurice Jarre's score is the greatest piece of film music written in the 1960s. Pauline Kael hated it. She found O'Toole's performance camp and the film's moral ambiguity evasive. She was wrong about the first claim and correctly identified the second, without understanding that the ambiguity is the point. Lawrence of Arabia is a film about a man who cannot be known by his audience, by his biographers, by himself, and it has the integrity to remain unknowable at its center while building around that center the most visually magnificent film the decade produced. It is number 1. It is not close. 20 films. 1 decade. The 1960s gave war cinema everything it needed to grow up. The veterans who had fought the wars, the directors who understood that honesty and entertainment were not mutually exclusive, and an audience whose own experience gave them the equipment to receive both. The films at the bottom of this list are excellent entertainment. The films at the top are something the cinema produces rarely, works that tell the truth about what nations ask of their people and what the asking costs.